presentation. I don't think I have the bandwidth to answer all of them, but these are questions I ask myself, and I think constantly we need to look at being able to provide these answers. So I've titled this Tightrope or Seesaw. Maybe it's neither. So I'd like you to think about it at the end of the day. What is it really when we talk about getting the right balance in whatever we do? I also wanted to put a picture of NIMHANS, which is beautiful, but then I thought it's like taking coals to Newcastle because you're also in a very beautiful place. But I do hope some of you will be able to visit NIMHANS because it has a fantastic ambience like Rishikesh does. And I think that's part of the beauty of working in an organization like that. So first of all, balance is a very often thrown about bandied word. And what exactly does it really mean? Is it to get the right weight or amount of something that you have? Is it a more philosophical sense of being able to optimize what you have in terms of equilibrium? Is it about a state of mind which allows you to enjoy what you're doing? Is it a balance, a perfect balance of work and non-work time that you can get in your life? And for some of us who enjoy our work, the concept of non-work time almost doesn't exist except maybe when you're sleeping, and sometimes you're also dreaming of your work. And does it mean a sufficient time to be devoted to work and to home? And unfortunately or fortunately, especially during COVID, our definition of what the workplace is has changed. Not so much for hospitals because we have to be on site in many of the clinical facilities, but more and more, we've gotten used to, doing things away from work, especially, when it comes to training, etc., etc. So definition of work and home again. I understand that many of you who work here, this may be home and this may not be home. In many ways, so definition of home also becomes critical to your understanding this whole concept of balance. And one of the things I started off by saying is the tightrope. Even though you're in the middle of beautiful surroundings, sometimes you can feel that you're walking on a tightrope. So one of the things to ask ourselves is, have the pressures of work actually intensified over time? We have more people. We certainly have more things to do. In spite of having more people and more, facilities in an organization, the pace of work seems to have intensified, and this is something that a lot of people, a lot of time, talk about. There's just not enough people, there's just not enough resources. However time you expand the resources, this continues to be a problem. The second question is, have advances go back? This is your pointer, the first one? Last. So one of the questions is...
No.
Yeah. Right. So one of the questions is, have advances in information technology actually helped us? Of course they have helped us. There's no doubting the fact, that so much, not only information technology, so much precision in various gadgets that we use for our various procedures, all of it has increased. But in terms of information technology, the information overload has also increased. So it's not actually, perhaps it's more difficult now and more challenging for residents to sift through all the information that they have on the internet to actually make a good critical evaluation of the subject they have to present. And that's true for all of us in terms of the information technology. And there are pressures to increase the speed of our responses. I don't know if it happens to all of you, but all of us constantly, and I keep wondering whether we're also turning into, phone junkies, because all the time you're looking at your phone. Earlier, you would come to your office the next day and whatever had come in by post the previous day, you would answer. Now within 5 minutes, you are not only, there is an expectation of your answering, you are also under pressure to open it and answer immediately. And very often, when you do that, you're not thinking things through, and sometimes there are, serious mistakes can happen. The next thing is, people's expectations from us have increased. There's the WhatsApp university. Everybody thinks they know everything. And, they will challenge everything that you tell them, even if you do so in their best interest. And that can be quite challenging and quite exasperating, especially when you're in a busy OPD, having to deal with a lot of patients. And of course, the intensity of work has increased because all of us are specializing in various areas. And then the depth of your work, the kind of the niche that you have to create for yourself in doing so has also increased. There is also a talk about whether in the working environment, the general commitment of employees to work has changed. I think this is a generational thing. Everybody thinks that in their generation people work very hard or very committed, that the present generation is not. So I think it's a generational thing, but this is certainly a question that people are asking. The second thing is more necessarily better. The more number of people that you have in an organization, in a department, in a unit, it comes with its challenges of man management, people management, person management. So therefore, I'm trying to get the ministry, and madam, I think you should also, to take off this thing of manpower and call it human resource. I haven't succeeded so far, but I think we must all keep trying to change the lingo that exists in the ministry. So I need to correct myself as well. So is there a growing conflict between the demands of work? So work for all of us in professions is the centrality of our existence. Now, at least globally, there is a shift from this focus of work as a centrality to a more balanced approach to everything we do in life and the decisions we make in life, because there are choices now. There are choices for people. Earlier, you got into a sarkari job, you were made for life. Perception is changing. Especially, for example, surgical disciplines, newer disciplines. There's a lot of things happening in the private sector. There are lots of opportunities in India, abroad. Nursing, for example, there's a huge demand for nurses abroad. So one of the biggest things that we have is that people constantly are joining, leaving, migrating. So more may not necessarily be better unless you're able to retain your human resources and really, make them function well. So, and of course, can we ensure safe, progressive careers for people who come into our institutions? That too is an important issue. And very often our institutions are pyramidal in their structure. So however good you are, you have to wait your turn. There are only a limited number of opportunities to grow up, and that can be quite a challenge. And do we take too many things for granted at work? Again, perhaps those of us who work in the umbrage of public institutions have certain facilities that are provided to us. And of course, so there is a sense of entitlement, there is a sense of expectation, and whether that causes conflict at work is something to think about. Now, this is called The Cat in the Hat. This is a very nice poem by Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss unfortunately became unpopular, but I think his work is amazing. So this is what I used to think I was in a situation about 20 years ago. I don't think the situation changes very much because you're constantly balancing so many different things. And therefore, trying to achieve optimal balance without dropping things can be quite a situation. And I feel different pressures at different stages in our lives. I see some of you are very young and starting your careers. So the kind of pressures that you face are possibly very different from when you're the senior sitting here in the audience. Because as you transition in various phases in your professional life, these demands keep changing. Gender. I think there is no doubt that gender plays a very, very critical role, and the priorities that gender poses in different developmental stages of our careers is again a challenge. We can talk about it later in this time, but that's another important area. Relationships at work are also very important determinants. The way we get on with our peers, the way we get on with our seniors, the way we are able to handle our juniors, that makes a lot of influence on the way we can deal with our workplace. Personal issues, how we are in our temperament. I know people who can, when they get angry, throw things around in you, and that doesn't create for a very good thing. I know situations where people, get physically violent when they're upset about something. I know people have emotional outbreaks when something doesn't go right. So temperament also makes a very important aspect. So your individual, your temperament, and your interpersonal relationships also make important impacts on the world of work. Organizational factors. I'll come to organizational factors in more detail. I think in hospitals, we haven't focused so much on organizational factors like bigger workplaces, like corporate workplaces, for example, or indeed factories, industries, have taken into consideration. And I think there are good practices that we can learn from other organizational aspects. Then, the objective elements of work, I mean, if you've ever worked in the UK, you know that the debate is how many hours should a resident work. So do you objectify it in terms of hours that people work, or is it subjective? That A can maybe do 12 hours of duty, 14 hours of duty, 24 hours of duty in a stretch, whereas B may not be able to do it. So what are these factors? And is work satisfaction then the key? How do you ensure work satisfaction? So at the end of the day, I mean, there are times, I'm going to make it a little personal and anecdotal. At times, when things go wrong, at the end of the day, I think, oh gosh, what have I achieved today? Nothing seems to have worked. So getting day-to-day satisfaction as well as overall satisfaction is also very important. Those of us who have more administrative work realize the amount of satisfaction we get seeing our patients. And the lesser it gets as you grow, more senior in the hierarchy, you really miss that kind of contact because there is immediate gratification when you're seeing patients and making changes in their lives. And as I mentioned earlier, are these just generational attitudes? So, we think we were like that and somebody else is different, and that kind of gets transmitted to subsequent generations in our life. So I was talking to you that we're not in isolation. We are within our workplaces. There is not only the family, there is the community, and there is also the larger social environment that we need to. So this is called an ecological approach to understanding ourselves, and that's very important. And in this, what role does the family climate play? Because invariably, there's a very nice saying in Yale, saying that the worker never leaves their problems at the factory gates. If you have problems in family, etc., you're invariably carrying it somewhere and it shows up. If there are huge pressures at work, you can't shout at your senior at work, so you go and shout at somebody whom you carry home, who's willing to be shouted at. So these are huge problems. And family responsibilities again change over the lifespan. Young people, your responsibilities are not the same as older people. So I know somebody recently that I read, this was an MP, I will not mention names, but the MP mentioned that she could not attend the sessions in Parliament because she had to look after her grandchildren. Priorities. So I'm just stating this because priorities across the lifespan does change. Can you really shut off from work once you leave your hospital? I mean, I can again ask yourselves those questions. Are you really able to do that, make that clean kind of cleavage between work and home? All of us have life-changing events. We're dating, people, things break up, it's terrible. You get married, positive life events also have stress, children, loss of pet, loss of family members. So many things can happen to us. Our own health can be a life-changing event. So we need to experience all that. And of course, we work in constantly changing environments and changing expectations of people. So the kind of dynamicity in the way we have to adapt to our work also therefore influences the way we are able to create balances in our lives. I'm sorry about this slide. I don't think you can see it very well, but this is a pasted slide, so I couldn't change that, enough time to change it. But the most important thing is, when there is high motivation and learning, you tend to do better. When your performance improves, when there is high motivation and learning, with high pressure and low motivation, that's possibly the worst kind of situation that you can be in. So, if there is tremendous work pressure, you are not motivated, and you have very little control over your work, those can be problematic. So this Tharasak's model looks at the demand that is placed on you. You have professions where the demand may be low, like somebody working in a specialized unit or somebody who's working in the workforce. There are places where the demand might be high, where outputs are expected, especially people who are in front offices and engaging with the public, or people who have a lot of demands on their work. So if your demand is very high and your control is very low, then stress is the result. If your demand is very low and your expectation is also very low, then monotony and tiredness really creeps in, and again interest is not maintained. So the real solution is to find the right kind of balance between your demand as well as your control, and finding that is really one of the keys to making sure that one doesn't get stressed in the workplace. What about home? Is affluence a good thing? This is something that we all ask ourselves. How much is important? Because affluence is important. We all want material things. But there seems to be a point in life beyond which it doesn't matter. So rich is not necessarily happy. So I think, again, finding that balance of these 4 factors becomes critical. In the context of families, is small beautiful? One doesn't know. One keeps talking about extended family systems, the support they offer. I can tell you, I possibly managed to do what I did in my career because I had fantastic family support. I had 2 sets of grandparents who indulged their grandchildren and helped them to grow. So I think these kind of support is not something that everybody has. So maybe there are disadvantages in terms of larger number of family members. There are advantages in terms of smaller. But these things definitely also influence the way we live. And quality time spent at home. If you're coming back from a hard day's work and there's conflict at home, that can also add to your work-life imbalance. And is the quality of home and community life deteriorating? I come from a horrendously urbanized city. It takes 2 hours and a lot of tension and cursing to get from place A to another. There was a time 20 years ago when I had to attend a meeting when I didn't have to think about the time. I left place A and reached place B in less than 15 minutes. Now, unless I plan it, I will be late for every meeting. So this also certainly has a time. We know that road rage increases when people are caught in jams and can't reach their workplace. Of course, you've heard heroic stories, I'm sure, on WhatsApp about a surgeon who got in a traffic jam and he got out and ran for 2 hours to do his surgery. I mean, you hear all kinds of stories. But the important thing is that whatever happens in the community also impacts on your sense of balance. So here are some of the organizational features that have been described as leading to work-life balance. So there are organizational factors like the work demands and culture, the demands of hopes and culture, and of course individual factors. Person's work orientation is very critical, personality, energy, temperament that I talked about, a person's ability to cope, gender, age, and life fitness. It's a summary of all the indicators. The subjective indicators are the balance that one gives in terms of what the emphasis is on work and what the emphasis is on home, a balance on home and balance of work, whichever is central to the individual can be a subjective indicator. Now, spillover or interference, as I mentioned, is another important characteristic of determination of balance. The hours of work, free time, and family roles. Finally, the work satisfaction and life satisfaction and balance of work and life are critical to both mental health and well-being as well as stress and illness. We now know that there is a very close relationship. In fact, I'm doing a project on integrating mental and physical health with the University of York, where you see patients with tuberculosis, with chronic heart disease, with cancers. There is a tremendous amount of psychological distress, and that in turn can influence their longevity and well-being and response to treatment. On the other hand, people with severe mental illnesses die about 10 to 20 years earlier. And they don't die of the mental illness, they die of non-communicable disease conditions like hypertension, diabetes, and so on. So they are very, very closely interlinked. And of course, we look at the behaviors of one and its effect on the other. So what are the relationships between work and outside work? There are several models that have been described. Again, I'm not going to go into these models too much, but one is called a segmentation model. So people who are able to very clearly delineate work and home and really keep them very distinct. Then there's a spillover model where one influences the other. There is the compensation model where where you don't get satisfaction in one sphere, you end up developing a hobby, spending more time with your pet, maybe taking your kids out for hikes on the weekend to kind of compensate for some dissatisfaction at work. Then the instrumentation model is where one actually enhances the other. Because you have support at home, you're able to flourish at work. Because you're doing well at work, you're able to, make sure that things go on well at home. And of course, a conflict model where there are huge problems, especially in working couples. This can be an important area of conflict. So, what is the impact of work-life balance? Better health. That's again very, very important because what work and life balance translates is to better physical health as well as mental health. And of course, greater engagement in the workplace. Therefore, it's important to invest in this area even as senior professionals, because if people enjoy working in your organization will do that much better. I mean, I think one of the USPs of my organization is that this kind of energy so far has been so obvious that anybody who comes to visit gets a sense of that energy, and therefore, and this is amazing, the feedback that you constantly get, that there's so much energy and so much enthusiasm in the workplace, and I think that is very, very important to keep the workplace and the people more engaged. There's less burnout. I don't like talking too much about burnout because I think it's a very, very stretched term, but that it definitely exists. And there is greater mindfulness of one another and looking out for each other. In smaller organizations, in smaller units, we were always, so closely knitted. I hope that still continues, at least, it is possible to do, but in larger units it becomes more difficult. I always tell Nani that a small community team is a very nice community team. They have traveled together, they go out together, they enjoy life together even outside their work. The larger they get, the more anonymous people get, the more challenging it is to keep people together and to keep them bonded. But that's very, very important. So, this is not what people nowadays say. People talk about the Bhagavad Gita and the way that it talks about the importance of work-life balance. And the kind of characteristics that are referred to in the Gita include being efficient at whatever you do, whether it's at your workplace or at home. So you can't be efficient at your workplace and then put your feet up and say, somebody else will run the home. If there is somebody else to run the home and enjoys it, that's fine. That's your luck. But otherwise, you have to be efficient at both places. You have to be consistent in your responses. And I think that's again a very important trait. And landing is also considered very, very important. Your sense of feet on the ground approach. How you can, controlling is a positive control. Not sense of controlling somebody else, but really having a sense of mastery and control over yourself. Even if you can't change the workplace, that you adapt yourself to the workings of the workplace. Similarly at home, that you adapt yourself if there are things that you cannot change. And social bonding is extremely critical. So developing networks, developing friends within the workplace, outside the workplace are all very, very important to making sure that you're in a good state of good place to be. How do you do it? So you have to obviously be aware of what's happening around you. Time management is very, very critical, and today, I think it's much more critical than it ever was. Healthy lifestyles, considering the employee benefits, more consultation with employees to arrive at decisions. That can't be easy sometimes, because you may consult till the cows come home, but there may be a government dictate that determines that you have to do things in a certain way. So that can lead to problems. But strengthening networks, taking care of people. I think people want to be recognized, people want to be acknowledged all the time, from the lowest cadre to the highest thing. So I always tell my colleagues, when they say something nice, I say, oh, that's nice, because you hardly ever get anything nice said about you. People come to you only with complaints. So everybody at every level needs some kind of reinforcement, providing breaks, and of course, do it yourself. Whatever you tell others, I don't call it practice what you preach, I don't like that expression, but do it yourself. If you think that you should expect others to maintain a work-life balance, try and see how best you can do it. You can't be successful all the time. So this is a small, template which tells you how you need to prioritize, tasks, time management, reassess all the time, and define your purpose or need. Take into consideration family as well as your workplace and your own efficiency, and you get more support in the whole thing. So it looks like it's a cycle of change rather than a tightrope walking or a seesaw. I think one needs to constantly look at these changing and being dynamic and what you can do to make sure. So is it a cycle or an achievement? People talk about the fact that you need to look at a whole sense of, simple things like, good sleep and good nutrition, maintaining relationships, paying attention to your emotions, prioritization and reprioritization, altering and achieving a greater balance, and of course being able to implement change. Oh, this is okay. What this basically tells you is about all the International Labour Organization, and it tells you about all the priorities that you need to do in the organization. Essentially a summary of what I showed you before, where you actually look at developing organizational ethos, a good working environment, implementing measures for employee well-being and so on. And this is available on the ILO website. I finally wanted to end with our own motto, which is Samatvam. So finally, at the end of the day, one of the ways to really be able to do things is to achieve balance in whatever we do. And try it. It doesn't matter what, these balances cannot be achieved all the time, every time. But you work towards that so that there is no sense of kind of, loss of control and distress over it. So we have this swan which is gliding on the turbulent waters of life and trying to maintain a sense of equality. Maybe each time we look at this, it reminds us of where we need to be. So, finally, to be equal in all circumstances, if you take the modern terminology, or to maintain samatva, I think understanding there are so many elements and so many changes in our lives, and whether we are at the beginning of our career or the middle of our career or the end of our career, to try and balance all of these remains a task for all of us. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. I'd be happy to listen to you as well.